Hey everybody, welcome to Pathfinder Friday. We're doing something a little different this time. We're doing a pre-recording. This is actually, we're time traveling from the past into the future, all because Peyton is out gallivanting in the big wide world. So we're doing this early. We're going to record our little talk about Cult of Cinders and answer a couple of questions folks have sent in to us through the message boards, and try to anticipate some other questions and kind of just talk about Adventure Pass, Age of Ashes, etc. I'm James Jacobs. I'm the creative director for Pathfinder.
I'm Eleanor Ferron. I'm a developer on Pathfinder.
And welcome to Pathfinder Fridays. Last week we talked about the first adventure in Age of Ashes, Hell Knight Hill. And one of the big things we talked about there was the interesting challenge of like writing an adventure for a rule set that isn't quite done yet. And when we do an adventure path, like I said last time, we have the entire outline written out, and it's a 22,000 word document with all sorts of information, background, history, and this allows us to have the look at the entire adventure path well before it starts being written or designed or anything like that. And as a result, we're basically able to hire all 6 authors at the same time. So when I started working on the outline for Age of Ashes, I already knew I wanted to hire who I wanted to hire to write all these things. And I think I did sort of an open call to a lot of the developers in-house.
Yeah, you did. You emailed all around and got 7 for 6 positions.
I did. So that was
poor
was
Michael
tricky.
Sire left out in the cold.
Aw, that's but he's got some stuff coming up. I don't want to spoil too much, but I believe he's got some stuff coming up in the future. Anyway, but so it's kind of a first come first serve basis, and I think you might have been the first one to reply.
Well, I don't know that one.
Well, you
it's your inbox.
You were certainly the first person to get the adventure turned in, which I very much appreciated. Yeah, it was a case of like, here's the 6 parts of the adventure. Once I have the 6 authors picked out, which ones would you be most interested in doing? What's most compelling to you? And then they were off and writing. And so what about the particular adventure of the 6 was most interesting to you?
Like, how do you mean? The outline you gave me, or
I guess like the opportunities, like what in the adventure was the thing that you were most excited about, like exploring?
Oh, well, I was just excited because he said it was a world hopping adventure, and that meant that we could go places we hadn't before. So we're down in the Mwangi Expanse, which hasn't seen a lot of play in Pathfinder. There's Serpent Skull, I guess, but we don't talk about Serpent Skull. I wanted to start showcasing like parts of the world that we hadn't seen all that much beyond Pathfinder Society a little bit.
Yeah, I was really eager to basically. One of the things that I mentioned last time is like each one of these is sort of tied to a different ancestry. Like the first one had a lot of goblin stuff going on in it. And with this one, with Cult of Cinders, we wanted to turn our attention to the Akuje Elves. And it's a ancestry that we've had in the game for a long time, but we never really did much with them. And the first few times we tried, it was like, they live in the jungle, but they look just like any other elves anywhere. And it was like, we didn't really get it right, and that was one of the things I was really excited. That's why we had a society essay about Akuje Elves and how they function and all that, and it was kind of a blank slate for a lot of.
A bit.
Yeah.
We've encountered them a few times in Pathfinder Society, but they mostly are mean to you.
Yeah, that's not cool. That's a weird thing about elves. Anyway, because in traditional fantasy fiction, a lot of elves are presented as like they're standoffish, they're kind of mean, they don't really want to play with anybody, but there always have been in the rules like they're chaotic good, and it's always bothered me that certainly sounds chaotic, but we've never really seen elves actually be good, and this is one of our attempts to show that they're cool people, They're
cool people. I mean, I sort of understand why they can be standoffish and other things because you've got they're guarding all of this stuff in their own nation, and people just sort of wander in without, any sort of papers or checking with the elves, and they're like mucking around with nuclear silos effectively.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you think you're doing? It's like, well, nobody was here, so I'm just mucking around with this nuclear missile.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or this imprisoned dragon god, which is just as bad.
Yeah, and so, you can sort of see why they might kick adventurers out from time to time.
Yeah. I think that one of the things also I really liked what you did with this. One of the things we wanted to do with this early adventure is to show off different styles of play. With second edition, we started doing stuff. We've always had this sort of not exploration, the encounter mode, where you go into, kick in doors, fight monsters, take their stuff, repeat, and that's kind of the basic game as it's existed for decades. There's always been other elements of like exploration and downtime and stuff like that, but it's never really been properly like codified into the core setting. And with second edition, we've got exploration mode and downtime mode, and I think you really did a great job exploring those two things in here. Be it with like going to the Akuje village or city, and it's not a place where you got to run around and stab people and kill people because they outnumber you by quite a lot, and you don't want to get them angry.
And we don't really want you running around and stabbing them anyway.
We also exactly. But there's other ways to we didn't also want to have it just be like a short little like go in and make one diplomacy check, and if you roll well, they like you. If you roll bad, well, you can't finish the adventure. That seemed a little goofy. So there's all this stuff like going on hunts and like the dance off is I think my favorite part of those things. That's pretty good stuff. I like how I like any adventure encounter where it allows the GM to really put the players on the spot and like challenge their perceptions of whether or not they can accomplish something by attacking with their swords.
Yeah, I kind of like the hot pepper eating contest, but that's just because I'm a little sadistic.
I almost had illustrations of the different types of hot peppers. Like,
oh, that would have been great.
Yeah.
They just get more and more like innocuous looking as they get hotter.
The last was like really tiny and just, that was fine.
Yeah, but I was thinking of basically rules of hospitality when you go and meet these Ekuje. And I mean, it seems like it's frivolous, but at the same time, these traditions are sort of built on, well, can we trust you? Are you going to play along with this? Are you going to show that you are receptive to our culture, or are you just going to be untrustworthy seeming?
Yeah, it's things like that where it gives the player characters or the players themselves really a chance to like, I guess get suspicious or something like that. It's at the same point, a lot of players are assuming the GM is always out to get them. It's like, we're meeting somebody that's not attacking us. That's only because they're trying to trick us so that they can then attack us. And something like this first chapter where there's not a single fight really in the entire first chapter. There certainly could be if you've got awful players. You know who you are. And but giving you these chances to succeed and fail and like, get involved in the politics and the culture and all that. It's a really, really fun way to kind of make the player characters want to help the elves in the first place. Because that's, in part, of course, they do want to, stop this evil dragon from, running amok and all of that. But there's also an element throughout the Age of Ashes where the player characters are kind of their own bosses. No one's really sitting down and telling them, you've got to go do this, you've got to go do that, you got to go do that, you got to do this. I've always found that players are more interested in going on the adventure if they feel that they are going on there because they want to. And these adventures really kind of double down on that, where it's like you meet these elves and they're cool, they're friendly, they got like these weird traditions to you that are normal to them, and your weird traditions are weird to them, etc. But having basically sort of a place where you can make friends and then want to help them, because then you find out that there's this evil, creepy curse going on out in the jungle that's driving them blind, and have these weird, cultists are spreading around and all of that. Really makes it, I think, more compelling. So one of the things we talked about last week was how maps are created, and when you're writing an adventure for publication, when you're writing an adventure for your home game, you can use a map taken from another adventure. You can just scribble out something on the graph paper or use a flip mat or something like that. For an adventure path, we need our authors to build their own locations, and they should be like unique and memorable sites that aren't just like another collection of rooms and all that. And one of the things that's pretty interesting to me from the side where I'm developing adventures is just seeing how different authors present different maps. And last week we saw Amanda's method was to like get it like a moleskin and scribble out like these like rough drafts of maps that then slowly become more and more organized into like on graph paper and stuff. But Eleanor, your maps, I really love how vibrant and colorful they are. I mean, it pretty much immediately when you look at one of your turnovers, I'm like, okay, that's obviously got a dragon inside of it and it's surrounded by jungle and all of that. I don't have to like look at it and squint and like, so what does that black scribble mean there? So this is your turnover of the very first or the main, by the way, there's going to be spoilers. We'll try to keep them somewhat minimal, but
leave this stream.
If you're playing in this adventure, there might be a big sort of giant dome building with a dragon skeleton inside of it.
Sort of looks like, a pastry or something from the outside.
Yeah.
You can see that on the Great British Bake Off.
This is just like the dragon scone. So this is not a spoiler. But yeah, so it's
soggy bottoms.
Yeah, exactly. And but it's also got, like, you dropped in a few little notes as to what's going on and what's in each room and all that, which was really helpful in developing the adventure. But when we use cartographers, it really helps for the cartographers to see like familiar symbols and stuff like that. So in the next one is the same map that I basically then took in and dropped down like solid black lines and little doorways where the walls and doors basically exist in this structure. And then we'll talk about the dragon pillars. I think later on somebody was asking some cool questions about them. But then dropped in these dragon pillars so that the cartographer wouldn't accidentally draw like torches instead of something more, these glowing dragon-headed totem things. And that's sort of like, again, the process through which this whole, translation from one person to another person to another person. And then the final adventure, of course, comes out. And we've got, let's see if I can aim this so it's not super shiny. It's hard to do. Anyway, there we go. So you get this sort of cool surrounding of like jungle and all that. And it looks pretty similar to what you did, which is, it's always a
much nicer render.
Well, it's nice, it's like professionally rendered, but it's still, you can tell it was your map from the start and then at the end. And that's something that not every map turnover gets to. I mean, there are certain cases that I have to really redraw entire maps, and they still work, but it puts a lot more work on the development side of things. I think then, actually, the next map we've got is one that I actually drew up for this one. No, that's still yours.
Nope,
that's the strip mine. So that's another example of one where I didn't really have to do anything. I dropped in, I think, a couple of little white triangles, shapes are hard. A couple little white square rectangle shapes for doors, just so that the cartographer would know exactly where to put the doors. But that was really it. And it's makes it a really, really nice quick turnover to not have to redraw an entire map. Because then when I'm going through the thing and you've got an entire middle section where you're exploring a bunch of sites in the jungle and all of that, and I realized that it's going to be helpful to have, zoomed in locations for people to explore and do their battles on. We were originally going to maybe thinking of doing like dropping in flip mats and flip tiles and battle tiles and all those things.
I suggested some flip maps that I turn over, but I mean, I did it because I had the word limit, but we always... it always varies in development. Yeah,
and I personally prefer having more unique maps. It bugs me if like every single ruined temple you go to looks exactly the same. It's like, oh, this temple of Desna looks a lot like the temple of Lamashtu. What does that mean about Desna and Lamashtu? And so the next map is basically I just threw together a bunch of locations for a lot of like the elephant village and a couple of temples and swamps and generic forest locations and stuff like that. And the idea was that those round circles all over the place were tree trunks, and I just kind of threw them together. And the actual final turnover of that one is a much more It's much prettier than the super scribbles that I did. But you can see like it still comes in like all of these. You don't see where exactly the tree trunks are, but it gets the idea across that there's clearings and jungles and stuff like that. So there's a lot of
nice.
Yeah, it does. There's a lot of different ways we can do maps, and sometimes we get to like panic situations. So, like I was saying, we assigned all of these adventures pretty early in the process, all at the same time, and then I got to the first adventure, started working on Hell Knight Hill, and realized that for all adventure paths, we always want to put something colorful and fun on the inside covers that you can look at, and it's both a piece of art that you can enjoy, but it's got information that'll help you play the game. And I decided, we got a lot of these things are set in cities and stuff like that, so let's just put the big city for each location on the inside front cover. And then I realized at the last minute, it's like, oh, we didn't do a city, and we got the city of the elves. So then I think I came to your desk and was like, Eleanor, can you draw me an elf city? I need to have it by soon. And you were able to turn that over like, I think I had it the next day.
I don't remember, but it was pretty quick. I mean, I had two advantages there. One is I didn't need to put a scale grid on it, so it's just you could slapdash the whole thing. And I have Photoshop on my computer, so I can just scribble that thing out really fast and don't have to scan it, don't have to like clean it up and make it all pretty. It just starts that way, and if it doesn't, I can fix it on my computer, and it's reasonably fast.
Yeah.
I think the most challenging part of that was just sort of like thinking of what should be in there.
Yeah.
I remember on my notes, well, we didn't show the notes even, but we had like these little woven together branches that would be like tunnels and farms and that sort of thing, and trying to connect these all with bridges, and just sort of grasping how huge these trees had to be for all the players out there. Just sort of look at the normal trees sitting next to those big ones and the buildings on there, and grasp what you are seeing when you arrive at this elf village.
Yeah, and again, it just was a quick little thing to put together, but I think that just looking at that right there, it makes it feel like it's not a human settlement, which is one of the things I really, really wanted to showcase in all of these, is different types of buildings, different types of cities and constructions. With this one, like you said, it had the advantage of it's not a place where you're really doing a lot of exploration or combat or anything in it. It's a lot of just sort of partying and just kind of hanging out. And this map is sort of, to that extent, somewhat of an experiment. And then in the final, of course, it came out again looking really close to the turnover with the same buildings and locations. And all of the cartographers really, really good at like translating this. And but it's also a case where it's not really meant to be a map that you're tracking where you're going and measuring the distances between, like, all right, if I'm going here to here, that means I have X wandering monsters and these events and all of that. It's really something that you should show your players and just kind of get them in the mood for the city, mood for like the whole thing, help them visualize what's going on. Let's see. Oh, I know something else we can talk about in this adventure. That's the element of building a castle. One of the differences we did with when we switched to second edition was we wanted each adventure to have its own sort of like collection of things that your player characters could earn in their specific monsters and feats and prizes and rewards that you wouldn't earn by playing in any other adventure, or you wouldn't necessarily be able to just pluck out of like the core rulebook. And it was a sort of a learning process trying to figure out how to integrate all of that into the adventure. One of the things that we did with this one was have a section where the player characters could build up the castle that they basically cleared out of monsters in Hell Knight Hill and found the deed for and all of that. And so there's rules in here for downtime where you can go in and like clean the place up and like build a place to cook your jungle scones and stuff like that. And it's not a really big part of the entire adventure path, but it's meant to be sort of something like in between adventures. Like maybe you finish Cult of Cinders and you're not quite ready to start Tomorrow Must Burn. Let's go back and like build maybe up an infirmary in the castle, or repair some of the holes on the walls and stuff like that. And it's a place for player characters to do things other than just like gather magic items and treasure, but actually like build a place for them to live. So it's a pretty cool way to to reward player characters for playing the adventure, I think. We're going to be doing a lot more stuff like that going forward in both the Adventure Pass and in the adventures themselves. So why don't we start looking at some of the questions that people sent in earlier, and there's some interesting things that came up that we can talk about.
Sure.
Let's see. The first question: how has Pathfinder 2nd Edition changed your approach to writing adventures, if at all?
In my particular case, it made me do the rules a little more slapdash because we didn't have the rules, and pretty much the guideline for the entire process was James Jacobs is going to fix that in post.
It was a weird situation because, like I said, we hired everybody to write these things. When do you guys start writing them? This was like,
oh, jeez.
It was like maybe, I want to say 6 months before we shipped the core rulebook to the printer.
That sounds about right.
So it was like, it was over a year ago. It was around Gen Con last year, I think.
I turned my thing over in either January or February.
Yeah, so all of that, and turning it over in January and February, the core rulebook and the bestiary itself were still in design. They were still being, worked on. And so for this adventure path, I basically had everybody kind of write the adventure as if you were writing for first edition, look to the playtest rules for potential, ideas and stuff like that. But again, the playtest rules are very different. So in a case like this, there wasn't really that sort of like doing things differently. And in one way, I think that's pretty good, because one of the things I always charge the design team with, I was really adamant about whatever game we get, we have to be able to play the same sorts of games we did in first edition as we do in second edition. I've always said that in world, if you're a character in a world, you wouldn't notice the edition change really. There wouldn't be like a sudden, change in the environments, and there was no like world-ending events that rewrite history and all of that. There was a little bit of that in there, here and there, but not to the same level as like a lot of other games have done before. And as a result, if we weren't able to use first edition sort of methodology for creating adventures and translate that into second edition, that would have been a huge, huge problem, I thought. So I think it was proof in the pudding, to look at it, the adventure that you wrote using first edition concepts and theory and all of that. It was the toughest part for me about translating the orders was getting the DCs, right? Like the raw little teeny numbers. That was pretty tricky.
The devil was in the details, definitely.
But it's still a case where it's like you still have like these fights with monsters inside rooms, or like contests where you like eat hot peppers and have a skill contest type thing. So
yeah, definitely anything that wasn't monster related was pretty much the same except for DCs. And definitely Hexploration didn't change all that much from Kingmaker.
Yeah. So it's really now that I've worked on all 6 parts of the adventure and I've done some other stuff, the big thing that I think is a lot more fun are the way downtime and exploration activities work. Because whereas in first edition, if we want to do something like, say an encounter has you have to go out into the woods and gather apples for the fairy dragon, and the fairy dragon doesn't like sour apples, only likes the sweet apples, but they all look the same. And so you have to go out there and make some survival checks or make some nature checks in order to pick the right ones, and then present them he wants to get out the apples alphabetized, and how that works is like kind of weird. But in like first edition, we'd have to do this whole thing down in like running text, and it would not really look that different than the rest of the text, and it gets lost on the page. But in second edition, having these things be like little stat blocks basically on how to solve them really makes it a lot easier to run these things and play, I think. Here's a giant question. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but the summary is the person is saying that the flow of the storyline between part 1 and are they saying chapter 1 or chapter?
Part 1 and part 2 flowed together, but they're worried about 2 to 3.
Right. So that's, and then they say book, and because we got chapters inside each one of these, and each one of these is a part, so it gets confusing. But I think the question is, between the first adventure, Hell Knight Hill, and the second adventure, Cult of Cinders, the storyline flowed together pretty well. And they're worried that the storyline has a hitch or something between parts 2 and part 3. all 6 of these adventures are written by different people, and they're all written at the same time. And the authors do talk to each other on and off. This type we all work at Paizo, so it's like yelling over the, "Hey, Ron, what are you doing in your adventure?" But it's still 6 different people, and that's a strength because that gives each adventure its own voice and its own sort of unique feeling. It's my job as the developer to make it kind of flow together, both by providing the overall outline at the start and then developing them so that the end of Adventure A segues right into Adventure B and all of that. And whether or not one flows right into the other or not is probably, if it doesn't, it's on me for not doing that correctly. I also sort of intentionally tried to make all 6 of these adventures sort of self-contained because this is the first 2nd edition adventure, and I would love everybody to go out and play Age of Ashes from start to finish. But I also know that people are really, on day 1, people might want to, or not day 1, but like once Cult of Cinders is out, people might just like, I don't want to do a first level adventure. I want to do something for like 5th level characters, and they just jump right in. So it's important for all of these to kind of have their own self-contained elements. Also, if we're also like constantly learning and trying out new things and all of that. So if something feels weird, we always welcome people to, come online and, give us feedback and all that. Be polite when you do it, because if you come online and start shrieking and yelling, it's going to hurt our feelings and we're not going to be able to do anything about it. But if you're polite about it and curious and all that.
When it comes to specific advice to making them chain into each other more, book 3 involves the spoilers, Scarlet Triad, right? Mm-hmm. I've been careful not to put Scarlet Triad NPCs in this book because I sort of assume that any NPC that contacts the PCs will have all the information beaten out of them and then murdered. So I didn't really want to risk that sort of thing. But there had been hints of the Scarlet Triad all over the place. The adventure notes places where they had given the villain in this book certain advantages and stuff. So I would sort of play up, and if you're not too worried about your PCs derailing everything, you can put some Scarlet Triad people around here. It's clear that they're coordinating with the villain in this book, and a lot of the operations tell how that's happening. So just sort of have them around as a day-to-day thing that stands out, because you've got a very specific Boggart and Charuka makeup here, and if you have like weird human mages or gnolls or whatever wandering around, it's gonna stand out a little. Yeah. So
there's also people don't have the final book in the series. There's a character in here, Chiron, who's
Chiron.
I don't want to spoil too much, but Chiron is an unusual version of the creature that normally is, somebody that wants to kill you and breathe fire on you and take your stuff.
Oh, like that's not a spoiler.
It's not. Nobody knows what that sort of creature is. But Chiron is a character in here that is sort of one of the characters that can like give you more information about behind the scenes. And he does have a role that comes into play later on that is actually ended up being pretty cool way that ties in together. So
we had to cut his NPC profile though, which kind of made things a little. Do you wonder if we should make a web supplement out of that and just put it up?
I do want to do more web supplements. Right now we're trying to it would be great to basically have a place where we could say like, this character got cut for space. We would like to do more about them. And here they are. Yeah, I think that would be cool. I mean, let us know also online if you guys are into web supplements. I know people are. They're a lot more work for us to put online because we got to like work with other departments to get them live and all that. But I'd love to do that sort of thing. In this case, I ended up having to cut him in part because I think part of it was the inclusion of that big map of all the jungle locations really is one of the things. Because I have to look at this when I'm developing. Is it important for this NPC to have full background so the player characters can interact with them? Or do we need to have more map support just for the encounters and stuff like that? So it's a case where it's like, we need both. We can't have both. And that's the toughest part about development, I think, is like deciding what gets into the final book. So we do still have a lot of that stuff handy, though. So we could make web supplement type stuff like that. Let us know if people are interested. All right, here's another question. How did you pick the effects of each pillar, and how was the process of designing the encounters around them?
Yeah, it was. They were sort of originally based on the effects of the prismatic sphere. that rainbows are really kind of evil and glary.
Oh, yeah.
They shouldn't be a sign of happiness anywhere. But there was more spoilers. There was sort of a protective wall around the big bad evil person's base.
Yeah.
And they were all powered by these pillars, which, of course, you have dragons, you have different colors of pillars. But instead of just going off the metallic and chromatic dragons, because, I mean, why? One, the Hawk hates metallic dragons, and two, you just wind up with a bunch of overlap on most of them. It's like gold's fire, copper's fire.
Yeah.
Or is it brass?
There's not enough effects.
Yeah. So instead we went with milder versions of the prismatic sphere. I didn't really want to send your 5th level characters to a different plane, although that would be interesting, is we're doing Planescape now.
Yeah. That's always, as a super quick side trek, I've always wanted to do more. We're doing more with the module line. It's sort of getting off to a slow start, but there are certain storylines that I've always wanted to just tackle on the module line that you can't really do in a longer adventure path. You know, it's the adventure where you get thrown in jail, the adventure where you shipwreck on an island, the adventure where you get hit by a prismatic spray and end up in Abaddon, and have to find your way out or whatever. Insert any plane here. Those are, I think, a really interesting place I want to go with the module line and with the one-shot adventures going forward. One of the cool things also with the and by cool I also mean challenging things with the dragon pillars is that they're hazards. They're not quite traps. They're not quite, they're their own sort of thing. And with second edition introduced complex hazards, which are basically traps that are programmed, or haunts, or things that can do multiple things over multiple rounds. And the rules for how those work were one of the very last things that got solidified. So that was super fraught for me, trying to figure out how to translate these 8 dragon pillars into basically the new rules. It's like at one point it's like I need maps for all 8 of these locations to basically show how they interact with everything. And then I kind of pulled back from that and it's like, I can get away with a couple of them not having maps, and so it was pretty tricky. So hope it worked out. What else we got? Considering encounters grant less experience as you outlevel them, how do you account for the party's level in a freeform exploration adventure that spans multiple levels?
I mean, it wasn't too much of a span because you're assumed to be 6th level when you start the exploration, and you hopefully end it at 8th, I think. Yeah. So it's really only a 2-level gap in this particular adventure. It's
definitely a different way to organize adventures. In first edition, every monster, if you're a 1st level kobold or a 20th level Tarrasque, 25th level Tarrasque, sorry, your XP is always the same. You're always going to give out 10 or whatever for the kobold and have 10 million for Tarrasque. And that's not how second edition worked. It's more reactive. Like, if you are more powerful, you'll earn less experience points if you defeat something less powerful, and more if you defeat something more powerful. And it's kind of tricky. I could see somebody going through an adventure like this, or even Hell Knight Hill, if it's like you just skip the entire 1st level and go directly to level 2. Chances are good, if you skip ahead, that you're going to get clobbered because you're 5th level and they should be 6th or 7th or 8th level. And that solves itself. But,
yeah. I mean, the reactive XP system sort of makes the XP solve itself, not beyond you getting clobbered, but it means that if you went to the wrong encounter first, you get more XP because it was a harder encounter than you should have gotten. So in theory, it'll all sort of even itself out.
Yeah, I could see something like the way people hand out experience points is sort of differs for each table. Like if you go get ahead of yourself and you do the really tough encounters and you earn enough experience points in 2 fights to go up a level, then you just do a couple of more. Like you've crammed these all into one mega session, like you play over an entire weekend, and the GM only lets you level up at the end of the session. It's going to be complicated because you're going to miss experience points. And then when you go back to the start of the adventure and you're doing the stuff that is now super easy for you, you're earning less experience points. So in large part, what we're looking for is just feedback from people as they play through this whole campaign, how the encounter design worked, how everything was produced. Does it work right? But also, for all of these, we've got at the front of every volume, we've got the advancement tracks down here.
We've got the advancements tracks. I think, do we have like a random encounter list in the back?
We do. I think in this one, I don't know if we did an encounter list or not.
I know the module definitely has some wandering monsters related to the plot.
Yeah.
And definitely, you could definitely add some.
One of the weird things, too, at the very late adjustment to the core rulebooks is the concept of wandering monsters is not really core supported. They really want... Second edition really wants you to custom build encounters for characters, whether it's like an entire end boss fight or just like a random fight with giant ants in the woods. And I think overall that makes adventures more interesting because you're not just randomly having things attack, but it does make exploration-based or sandbox-based adventures more difficult. One way I could see us doing this in the future is like rather than having just a monster chart, have 2 or 3 pages of just short encounters that could happen. But really, it's important for when you're running one of these adventures and you need to keep track of your players' progress and you know where they're going to be going, you know what sort of encounters they're going to get to, and don't be afraid to like just hand out experience points. If you know they're not going to go back to the start and they're gung-ho to go on into the end, you know, it's fine for them to level up quickly. The way that experience points hands out is it's less math heavy. It works better if you just want to even do milestone achievements and say, all right, you've managed to befriend the Yakuja. You gain a level. And then, all right, you've managed to take out 6 of the 8 dragon pillars. That's enough for you to get into the thing. You gain a level. So
yeah, and there's also the story awards that people shouldn't neglect. I mean, if you've have people just sort of forging ahead, maybe you should have a reward for just finding places. You know, finding the encampment that you're looking for. That seems like a good story reward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I do actually a lot in games when I run them is if the party does something that I think is fun, at the end of the session, I'll make sure like, all right, you guys spent 2 hours arguing with Harriet. And the end result was nothing. You didn't gain anything. You didn't lose anything. But there was 2 hours of fun arguing with a tree lion. And at that point, I might say, like, since you guys had so much fun there, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you 150 experience points for that whole thing. And not only does that make the players not feel like they wasted their time spending 2 hours talking to a lion when they could have spent 2 hours fighting 10 different things. It also tells the players like, oh, we get rewards for doing fun stuff. And that makes the game more interesting, I think, in the long term.
Do we have any questions for ourselves?
Do we have any questions for that's something that actually is I kind of do. I've dropped mention of Harriet just now. And one of the things that I really like about your adventure design, Eleanor, is you put in, as I'm hitting this and making these repercussions.
Don't dimple the book.
I really like how you throw characters in who are unexpected, who like approach things in different ways. You know, whether it's like a pop band that my Starfinder character gets obsessed with, or it's in this case, it's a character that one of the first characters I knew that I wanted to illustrate in here was Harriet, who is a lion who likes sleeping, who thinks she just thinks she's a leopard, or
she's just weird.
She's just weird. And that's the thing that's cool about it, is like sometimes a weird NPC, whether it's a lion or some half orc who likes picking up garbage and collecting things, or a Gerard Pendergast or whatever the guy's name is in here. It's like, oh my gosh, it's just characters that really stick with you and are fun to role play. They're fun to illustrate. It's good stuff. I appreciate them.
Thanks. Yeah, I remember when I was younger, my parents bought me this book on Chuck Avery because I was interested in art. I don't think I actually remember a thing about the art in that book, but I do remember the intro where he talked about this pet cat he had when he was younger. And it was like this weird, grumpy, snaggle-toothed, ugly cat. and it had some habits like swimming in the ocean. It liked to swim. And so, these poor people out on the beach are swimming along, and this like soggy, horrible snaggletooth creature is swimming up towards them. It's like, oh God, what is that? And it also liked to eat grapefruit.
Like entire grapefruits, or like?
Yeah, they would take a whole grapefruit and throw it down to the cat, and he'd play with it like a ball for a while, trying to like get his claws to tear into the peel so he could shove his head all the way in and eat the grapefruit. And yeah, it's just sort of like those things stick with you. It's like, what is wrong with your cat? But at the same time, it sort of lets you know that there are really creatures, animals, people out there, and you and I aren't going to really go out and take a shovel and find some goblins and smack them and take their money, but we could probably run into some interesting characters out there.
Oh yeah. That's a cool story. I mean, that's something that I think is really a lot of GMs kind of forget about. It's like you get into the whole thing about like optimizing your characters or making sure that the encounters are built just exactly right so they challenge the party, and some of the encounters that I remember the most fondly are the ones where it's like we'd spent the entire session like, shopping or arguing with some strange NPC or stuff like that. So I like when authors put these characters in here that are like, you could fight them, but if you talk to them, you're going to have a lot more fun. So,
I mean, I've got a question for you from last week. Aside from my poor precious NPC that wound up in the dustbin, what else did you like but wound up on the cutting room floor? In Cult of Cinders? Yeah.
Let me cast my brain back.
Nothing. The answer is nothing. It was a terrible adventure.
No, the answer is not nothing. It's terrible. So the thing is I really try to get as much in there as possible. And I think that not illustrating the pep. I really wanted to illustrate a scene with like Mauricio and Kira like eating peppers, and then Valeros eating one. I was like, I can handle, and just spraying, like spitting all over the place. I think that I would have liked to have more. Just looking through here, there's more. The first third of this adventure is my favorite part, to be honest. And I would love at some point to maybe do an adventure where the whole thing is something like that, where it's like there's not a single
adventure.
Yeah, there's not the dating sim adventure, or I mean, because I did some of that with Jade Regent and it was whatever. But like if an entire adventure is like a party or some sort of something where there's not a single fight in the entire thing, I think that'd be a fun experiment to try out. Like you said, with story awards and stuff like that, you can still earn experience by going up levels. And I don't know. The game itself is so strongly geared toward, rolling initiative. It's a tricky thing. That might be a better topic for like a one-shot adventure, but
dating sim module.
Now I'm intrigued. Dating sim module. What top 5 ancestry should be in the dating sim module? That's maybe.
Ooh, that sounds like a forum question.
Yeah, that's a good forum question. Let us know. Let us know also if you were interested in adventures or stuff like that, where it kind of steps away from the expectation of the standard. I mean, even like I'm not complete. A dating sim adventure would be pretty fun, but you could also do one where it's like a complete stealth game, where it's like you have to go through this entire adventure without getting caught.
Oh, good luck on that.
I know. I mean, that's tricky, but there's those like video games that handle this, where it's like if you get in a fight, you're through. Adventures where it's like I don't know, like a county fair bake-off, where you have to gather the right ingredients, and I don't know. Anyway,
Battleship Brigade.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess that about covers it for Cult of Cinders. I have to
stop
banging this thing.
That book.
I know, it's my book. I can do whatever I want. I know where they make them. I can get more.
I'm
so
to feel disrespected here.
Oh no. Well, I'm just hitting the parts that were written. Oh, you wrote like most of this, so okay, never mind. I'll be good. It's a wonderful adventure.
Smashing Jason Keeley's monsters, huh?
Yeah, Jason, your monsters are wonderful. Cool. So next week, we're not going to do another one of these. We're going to do Cult of Cinders. We're going to do more Age of Ashes in the future. The next one is Tomorrow Must Burn. We'll have Ron in here in the hot seat. And I'm not sure what's on schedule for next week. Again, Peyton has got that all sorted out, and we'll have some information up there soon enough. And oh wait, he's throwing the schedule up. Oh, right. That is okay. I will be here next week. It'll be me and Luis. We'll be talking about the top 10 new developments in the world lore, what they change over to second edition. So if people are like particularly interested in something in the setting that has changed between first and second edition, let us know in the forums, and we'll make sure to talk about that next week. Otherwise, I guess I blathered on long enough. I don't know if there's anything else to say, or have fun, and we'll see you.
Signing off.
Yay!